Hey everyone. So the Ontario Ministry of Finance released their 12 recommendations for changes under their review of the Mortgage Brokers, Lenders and Administrators Act, which was created in 2006 and implemented in 2008. So it's been about 20 years that they haven't done a major review like this. So it's about time. However, out of the 12 recommendations, 50% of them are quite frankly fluff and really wasn't worth the time and effort to basically implement or to come up with. It was really not impactful at all. And this is nothing against the people at the Ministry of Finance, but it is the result of when people who don't actually understand an industry are relying on input from people who don't actually work in the industry on how to impact that industry. Instead of listening to individuals who deal and trade in mortgages and are actively the boots on the ground dealing with customers and understand the loopholes and the gaps and the flaws and the opportunities for improvement in the industry to make it better, this is what the result ends up being. 50%, so 6 out of 12 of the recommendations being absolute fluff and of no real consequential value to the industry and to enhancing the industry, making it better for mortgage brokers and for consumers. So I'll talk quickly about those 6. Recommendation number 4, modernizing service delivery. So it only took 20 years for the government to realize that email delivery of notices and letters is an appropriate and acceptable way to communicate as opposed to their current method of delivery, which is using the typical snail mail and, of course, fax machines, as if anybody still has a fax machine. So 2 years worth of consultation to come up with the fact that, hey, guess what? Email exists and we should use email. Okay, finally, at least. Recommendation number 6, expand mortgage agents' access to authorized lenders. Well, they're authorized lenders. Should they have had that access to begin with? Yes, because the access they're talking about is lenders that are operating and lending with insurers like Sagen and Canada Guarantee, right? The current version of the legislation, which wasn't clearly communicated in the industry at all, really restricts the mortgage agent level ones who cannot deal in private mortgages to also only being able to deal with banks, credit unions, trust companies, and lenders who are authorized under Canada Housing Mortgage and Corporation, CMHC, as opposed to the other two insurers, Sagen and Canada Guarantee. So that's a restriction that should have never been in place because they're all equivalent and of the same type of capacity as lenders. So it doesn't really make sense that that was a restriction in the first place. Recommendation number 7, enhance education on private mortgages. Well, we just had implementation of the agent level classes, the private mortgages course, which was designed to enhance the education requirements to deal in private mortgages. So the fact that they have to actually add legislation saying enhance it, to me suggests that you're saying it wasn't good enough in the first place, so it wasn't implemented correctly and it needs to be done better. Did we need legislation for that? No. We could have just said, hey, we need to be better and do it, right? Promote identity verification, authentication, compliance. Well, we're already governed by FinTrack in the industry, which came into effect October 2024. So it's already a requirement. Do we need to add that to legislation to make what's already a requirement and to have it that there's already been duplicated legislation that we have to follow? Seems like a waste of time and effort. Recommendation number 9, mandate reporting of certain changes of circumstance. Well, it's easy to just say, hey, like these things need to be reported to the regulator within a certain time period. That could have been done as a guidance, that could have been done as a notice, that could have just been implemented without a massive change or rewrite on the legislation. Again, time and effort spent on something that could have been really communicated and done over a 3-minute Zoom meeting, 2-minute email. Like, it did not need massive consultation on that. The one that really gets me is the review of the errors and omissions insurance requirements. Now, some of you watching this video might be like, well, hold on, if you're going to be criticizing this, why didn't you get involved and, come forward with your recommendations or what you thought they should do, and I actually did. So I submitted my recommendations to the Ministry of Finance. You can go look it up. My company's Approved Financial Services. You can look it up on the proposal from the Ministry of Finance. You'll see my company's listed there. One of the recommendations I made was about errors and omissions and how it is implemented and handled in the industry. The government the Ministry of Finance is saying all that needs to be changed is increase the minimum requirements of errors and omissions, which, okay, fair enough, you can. And they're citing the reason is that mortgage values are higher now than they were, back when the legislation was written in 2006. Fair, but not necessarily the value of the claims have gone up. Yes, there might be more claims happening, but not necessarily the value. So it kind of doesn't really make sense with what they're saying, but fair enough. If you want to increase the minimum thresholds, fine. But what the real issue is, and what my recommendation was around, is the fact that mortgage agents and brokers, if they were involved in a transaction that triggered a claim, the claim, whether it's for $5,000, $15,000, $50,000, or $500,000, will be impacting the brokerage and the brokerage's premiums, which typically is shared amongst all the people in the brokerage. Then that agent, who was the person involved in the claim, not wanting to pay a higher portion of the premium, could literally transfer to another brokerage, leaving the original brokerage stuck with the higher premium, impacting the other agents and brokers left in that brokerage. And that person goes off scot-free to a new brokerage, doesn't have any negative impact from that claim, and goes on conducting business however they see fit. That to me is a major flaw in how it's handled. My recommendation was that the brokerage has to have errors and omissions to protect the brokerage, but the individual agents and brokers should have their own policy that follows them. So if they leave a brokerage, that policy follows with them. And therefore, if there was a claim, it goes against their policy first. And therefore, they're the ones directly impacted for the premiums and not impacting the brokerage and the rest of the agents and brokers in there. That is how it's done in the insurance industry, which is also governed by the same regulator. So I don't see why this would be something not even considered, or why would it have not even been the case to begin with, since there's already precedent in pretty much every other regulated industry that has errors and omissions insurance on how it's implemented and how it's treated. The mortgage broker industry is the only one that differs from that, and I don't understand the rationale for why in the first place it was different, or why they're not even considering making that change. Instead, they're focusing on what is really the least impactful part of the errors and omissions policies or changes that need to be made therein. And of course, the last one of the recommendations, number 12, the use of plain language. Well, first of all, you're writing legislation, and anybody who's ever tried to read legislation knows that it's in legalese, because guess what? It's a legislation. That's kind of how it works. Of course, there's nothing wrong with making it easier to understand. So sure, let's make it easier to understand. But did that really need to be part of a 2-year review? And does that need to be part of legislation to say, hey, let's write legislation to state that the legislation needs to be easier to read? Okay, really, again, waste of time and effort. But the bigger problem here is that the entire legislation is principle-based, which means you do not have defined guidelines or defined set, this is how you do it every time, and everybody has to follow it the exact same way. There's room for interpretation. There's room for various ways of implementing, as long as you get to the same result. By definition, then, having a principle-based legislation restricts you in a lot of ways from having plain language. So the fact that energy and effort and time has been put in consulting or doing whatever to come to this recommendation really seems like, again, a waste of time, and the direct result of listening to individuals who don't actually have to implement or deal with these things. There's quite a few brokerages and lenders that did submit recommendations from what I can see. I don't know what all their recommendations are, but where the most amount of quoting and the most amount of things come from organizations that they're part of the industry, but do they actually deal in the industry? Do they actually know what's going on? And do they actually solicit input from people who directly deal with this, or people who, or what they believe in the industry needs? And that's a big issue. The Ministry of Finance really, I think, on this, when you have 50%, 6 out of 12 of your recommendations that really miss the mark, I think this was 2 years of wasted energy and effort. It's not going to help anything with the industry. It's not going to improve what is needed to make the mortgage industry stronger. Everyone who knows me knows I'm a very, very passionate advocate for making this industry stronger, making sure that we have a industry that consumers can be confident in, for myself and for all mortgage brokers, because we good mortgage brokers see ourselves as professionals, and we want to be seen as professionals, and we want to be held to a standard that other professionals are held to, and we want to be able to operate at that standard. And the legislation falls short of promoting that throughout the entire industry, because the recommendations really, as I said, miss the mark and have no significant impact on guiding this industry and making this industry stronger. That's my 2 cents. Of course, I'm sure there's people who's gonna disagree with me. That's fine. That's great. You can disagree all you want, but if you want to see meaningful changes, I think sometimes you got to speak up. And I'm probably not going to get a lot of points with the Ministry of Finance on this. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to talk the truth, and I'm here to advocate for what the industry actually needs, so that consumers feel confident in dealing with us. That's my 2 cents, guys, and I hope everyone has a great day. Take care.